Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. It is Sunday afternoon. Today is June 27th, 2021. For those tuning in on the replay, welcome. I decided to jump on today and do a little live monologue or riff or discussion for those of you who want to join me in the comments about our schools. I spend an inordinate amount of time on social media, unfortunately, but it's kind of where I get my material and find out what all of you are talking about and concerned about and doing about your kids' schools. And I say that as well to teachers as to parents. Okay. And there's so many things that I try to say in my little posts on social media, but I find it's easier to talk about. It's easier to think it through. I tend to process the ideas fairly quickly and they just come flowing out of me. And I'd rather tell you what's on my mind in that order and then respond to your questions maybe once a week like this than try to get it all into social media posts. So I think I might make a regular habit of this, to be honest, but we'll see how it goes today. This might not be the right time of day, but I think I want to do a weekly sort of live about recapping what's gone on and what I'm thinking about the end of each week, because this is sort of a moving target. We keep learning more and more about what's going on in the schools, what's going on with parents fighting it. And I just want to be able to address it as it's happening and hopefully still create some evergreen content for those people who are playing catch up. Before I get into this conversation, though, I do want to just invite you, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, to go ahead, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I do try to create at least one video a week, but sometimes I do 3 or 4 about current topics in education, usually around what's going on with social justice education, critical race theory, social emotional learning, all the little buzzwords and word salad involved. And I try to be as specific as I can for parents primarily, but also for concerned educators and taxpayers who understand that education is an important issue for all of us. So if you want to be informed about when I make new content, do that. I also maintain a locals community, and you can join that and, get in on some Zoom calls. I do that twice a week. One of them is on a Sunday evening. And we can talk in more depth. And if you're looking to homeschool, I can help you with that. But for today, what I want to talk about is the concept of taking back the schools. There are some organizations that have sprung up. Some of them are extremely local. Some of them are chapters of larger national organizations that have as their mission taking back the public schools, presumably for the kids, right? For the kids and for America or whatever it is that we, for taxpayers who are paying for them. And whenever I see that, I think, okay, taking back implies they once belonged to us in a meaningful way, that we as parents and kids and even teachers to a certain degree kind of own the schools, that they were responsive to what we wanted them to teach, and that we believed we had certain common goals for that. And somebody's already joined the comments to say that I'm lying about critical race theory. I'm not lying about critical race theory. Critical race theory is an academic theory that pretty much sprang up in the law schools to talk about law. It was a way of looking at outcomes, negative outcomes by race that were persistent since the civil rights movement, that hadn't advanced as rapidly as the creators of critical race theory thought they should. And the theory was it's because all of the institutions of our country are inherently racist because they were built by or developed by a white dominant society and culture. Now, it's a theory. Actually, it's not even really a theory. It's kind of more like an idea, barely even a hypothesis, because there's no way to really test that. And there wasn't any testing done. That idea was then just applied. Like, let's look at all the negative outcomes and there's our proof. There's a negative outcome, therefore it's because racism. Well, that's not really how science works. That's not how theories work. So, you can think that that's how it is, but that's not how it is. As far as the schools are not teaching about critical race theory. They are, however, teaching in critical race theory. Now, critical race theory is a Marxian theory. It takes race and replaces class as the power struggle going on in our society. It operates from a position of everything is a struggle. And I would disagree with that. So, in any event, yeah, this is a great question. If that's the case, why do Asian immigrants do better than whites? Not only that, we had a period of time in this country when Chinese people in particular came here, and we've seen this. We've seen all kinds of footage of it. We've seen pictures of it. They worked to build our railroads, amongst other things, and were treated terribly. They were borderline slave labor. And we don't talk about that much. In fact, I don't think we really talk about it at all. And it's something we should be talking about. So whenever people say, you don't want to teach the real history of America and the dark and evil things that we did, I'm like, no, please, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how it affected all immigrants from every possible culture that came here. Even Irish people who were white, certainly as white as I am. Okay. My actual great grandparents, my mother was adopted, but they were Irish. They were from Ireland. So they didn't fare so well either. It really just, there's a story. Everybody has a story. That's not really the point, is it? The point is, did we make progress? That's not what they're teaching in school. That's not what they have been teaching for quite some time. They're not talking about the progress we've made towards the aspirational goals of everybody having equal opportunity. They talk about it like the civil rights movement happened, and then we either went backwards or stayed in Jim Crow, and it uniquely affected Black and brown people because of something to do with color, when we know for a fact that it didn't uniquely affect Black and brown people. So here's another comment. They did mention in Blazing Saddles about the movie might as well be canceled. Very true. I don't think you could make that movie today. In fact, I'm pretty positive you couldn't. And the great thing about that movie is it showed how self-conscious people are about these terms, because the actors, what went on behind the scenes is the actors were really uncomfortable reading their lines. Not the Black actor, ironically, but by all accounts, the white actors were like, I don't want to say these words. I don't feel comfortable saying these words. And that movie was made in the 70s. So this is, you wouldn't even, they wouldn't even let you think that movie today. Yeah, there might be some thought police coming to Minority Report to get inside our heads. So sorry for being derailed, but whenever I get comments like, stop lying about critical race theory, I'm not telling anything that's a lie about critical race theory, either about what it is or how much of it's in the school. The theory is not in the school, except inside the heads of the teachers. If the teachers are taught the theory in college and university, and they're taught this is how the world works, then it goes into the classroom in the minds of the teachers. What is this? Remember the one part? But we won't take the Irish. Yes, so true. I mean, there were signs. Irish need not apply. For a long time, you could be Black and get jobs. You couldn't be Irish, but we don't talk about that, of course, because it's all got to be about color. Part of that was to do with anti-Catholic sentiment. There were people in America who were more afraid of Catholics than they were of different people of different races, because they believed that Catholics would be loyal to Rome, be loyal to the Pope, and not to the American flag or America or whatever. So there were actually anti-Catholic laws. It's right. The theory of critical race theory becomes practice, or as they would call it, praxis, meaning what you actually do to take the theory and put it into practice or live it. Remember, they're saying you have to change how you think and you have to do the work. Well, what do people think they're doing? That is what do the work means. Now, the next thing that people will tell you is that Kendi and D'Angelo and Crenshaw are not part of critical race theory. That's really splitting hairs and playing word games, because that would be like saying Methodists, Baptists, and Lutherans are not really Christian because they're not Catholic. And I know there are some people on the planet who say that, but what I'm saying is that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. They all worship essentially the same God and have the same core premise that, Jesus is Lord. Okay. Well, in critical race theory, it's the same thing. The same underlying tenet that everything you see in life is a system of struggles, it's power struggles, and that in this country, it's race. race is at the core of it, and that white supremacy is underpinning everything, because if something is a system, it is presumed to have been put into place or become dominant because of oppression, not because it worked better, not because people liked it and voluntarily adopted it, but because of oppression. That somehow the premise is that if let's say all the Black Africans came here voluntarily, they emigrated here voluntarily at the same time period in history, that our institutions would have been completely different and would function differently, and that those people would not have come here and adapted to the sort of English common law framework that the dominant majority population put into place. They would have fought about it and said, no, 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 we want things to be like they are in Africa. And nobody challenges that premise. The premise is they were brought here against their will, and therefore the only reason they adapted and assimilated to these systems is they were brought here against their will. And then I look at people who emigrate here from Africa and I say, but that doesn't really pass the smell test. There are people still to this day coming here voluntarily, eager to participate in our society, as flawed as it is. And they do well. And so that is not to say slavery is good. Don't confuse the two topics. That's just to say that if the premise is because they were in bondage, all the systems that came up around them are systems they wouldn't have wanted, is simply not true. First of all, the entire country wasn't always in bondage. You had free people, free Blacks in the North. Doesn't mean they were treated exactly equally. It doesn't mean they weren't racist. It just means they were participating in those systems. They absolutely were. Also, after the Civil War, there were Blacks participating in politics and running for office and becoming members of Congress and things like that. They didn't suddenly say, we need to tear down all these systems, get rid of Congress, get rid of the Constitution. We don't want any part of that. In fact, they wanted part of it. Like, we see the aspirational goals of this Constitution, and we deserve to be represented by it too. They wanted that. So you're negating all of the aspirations of enslaved Blacks when you say that these systems, that the Constitution needs to be tossed simply because it was written by white men. When that wasn't the goal of the enslaved African. The enslaved African was like, I want a piece of that. I want to be free like that. Because we're not allowed to talk about how they came to be in slavery in the first place. Okay, we're not allowed to talk about that. We're not allowed to talk about people selling their own people. We're not allowed to talk about any of the factors that went into that. It's just, this thing happened. White people bad, Black people victims forever and always. And anything built by white people, anything written down by white people, any law made by white people is inherently bad and oppressive. Nobody else would want a piece of that. And I just think we need to question that. I don't think that's true. Let's see. I'm going to go back and look at some, let's see. Yep. Here we've got my great grandmother was an indentured servant here in America at 12. She was from Ireland. Yes. Lots of people's relatives were. Let's see. Didn't Crenshaw help create critical race theory? Yes, I believe that she did work with Derek Bell. I think he was like her mentor, and she just created this offshoot of it, but it was an offshoot. It wasn't like, I'm going to go create something completely different called intersectionality. No, she just felt like it wasn't just race. She wanted to like break it down even farther, make it more granular. Let's see. So when do we get different branches of who is the Lord of CRT? Yeah, I mean, if you're going to say that's not the real thing, then why isn't anyone calling Derek Bell up to the plate? Or Delgado? Why aren't these people putting them on television? They're not dead, to my knowledge. So like, bring them up to the plate and defend their theory. Where are they? We don't see government giving out thousands of copies of their books to our military. But like I said, the underlying premise is the same. America is an inherently racist country. It's inherently racist white to Black. All the institutions were built on the foundation of slavery and racism, and therefore need to be dismantled for us to make any progress. Like, the progress we've made so far isn't really progress. It's just interest convergence, and people are still oppressed. All visible evidence to the contrary. No, don't believe your lying eyes and ears. And by the way, Bell is dead. Thank you. Okay, Bell is dead, but Crenshaw's alive. I think Delgado's alive. Is he alive? I should look this up. I apologize. So anyway, yeah, the great schism of CRT. It is a religion. And like I said, that's like saying that all these denominations are not really Christianity. It's utterly absurd. So it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter as a teacher, as a parent. And I assume as parents, teachers, concerned taxpayers, you aren't really that hung up on what it's called. You just latch onto that term because you're like, give me something I can hold on to refer to this crap that's in my kids' schools that is replacing academic basic skills and hurting my kid. I need something to call it when I go to the school board meeting. And so Chris Rufo comes along and James Lindsay comes along and says, well, this is kind of what it is. And it's shorthand, to be sure, but it really does refer to everything that is critical social justice related. Critical meaning we're going to criticize everything that is. We're going to start from the premise that anything we don't like is because all of this is bad. There's no nuance at all. I have a hammer. Every problem is a nail. And then the problem is when I don't have enough nails to justify my continued existence and income, I'm going to take this tiny little thumbtack, this little hangnail, this little dent in the, whatever it is, and I'm going to come along with my hammer and hammer away at it until we have a really big problem and say, see, humongous problem. And then I have income for the next 10 years because you give me a 6-figure job in the public schools as a diversity, equity, and inclusion director or czar or whatever the heck. And suddenly I'm important. So anyway, let's continue because the topic that I wanted to talk about is what would it look like to take this back? Well, this presupposes that before everybody figured out that all of this neo-racism, neo-Marxism junk was being taught in our schools, this premise that like they were fine, everything was fine. And then this junk came in the schools sometime in the last 4 years, and now it's terrible. And I'm here to tell you, no, things have been really, really, really bad. Things have been bad since I was in high school, probably late 70s, early 80s. Things have been bad in public school. Things have been bad ever since they decided that they didn't need to use the science of reading anymore to teach your kids how to read. That immediately created a division that fell along racial lines. Why, Deb? Why did it fall along racial lines so often or so visibly? Well, because the science of reading is accessible to everyone, okay? Whole word reading or look-say reading is really only accessible to kids who either already know how to read, like they came into school prepared, mom and dad read to them when they were itty-bitty little kids and were sounding words out for them by just instinct. Hey, sound it out, sound it out. This A makes ah. Okay, so they had this kind of early childhood education at home. And which if you're in poverty, it didn't matter if you're white or black, if you're in poverty, you probably didn't have that. But we're not allowed to look at poverty. We're only looking by race, right? So nobody's really looking at the white kids in poverty. They're just looking at the black kids. So you have that early education. You come in and now you have look-say, and it kind of doesn't matter because you already pretty much read. Or it works for the kids with really high, I'm going to say a term nobody likes, IQ. That means they have really good working memory. They can memorize thousands of words. And so look-say isn't as big a problem. But for kids who don't have either of those things and has nothing to do with race, it just has to do with a certain percentage of kids don't have it, it's going to be more of a struggle to read. And so our literacy rates started going like this. And as I said, they're going to get worse faster for people who are, as they like to call it, marginalized or poor because they don't have as much access to books and preschool and all kinds of other things, time with their parents, maybe they're in daycare. So their dip is going to go quicker, farther, faster. But it looks like racism, doesn't it? It looks like racism because theirs goes faster, but it's the same negative thing. It's the same bad teaching of reading. But now we see the dip and we go, oh, racism is in the schools. People on the inside were saying, this is a messed up way to teach reading. They did it right away. Shut up. Stop talking. Nope, it's fine. Nope, it's really good because they'd invested so much money in training people, buying this curriculum, etc. And they wanted it to work. They wanted, why? I don't know. We can hypothesize why they were so committed to whole word all day long, but you could decide it was truly racist. They're like, we don't want the poor kids to read. And most of the poor kids that we see in the inner city are black, so we don't want them to read. You could really be cynical and say it was that. Or you could just say they're dumb and incompetent and self-serving, and they had friends making money off of it, or who knows what. Or the university didn't want to change what it's doing or didn't want to admit it made a mistake. They're ultimately politicians, blah, blah, blah. I would say it's probably a little bit of all of this, a little bit of all of these things. The bottom line point is the schools were in trouble for a long, long time. John Taylor Gatto told us that 25 years ago. He said after he'd been teaching for 30 years, The method is the madness. The method is the problem. Everything you're doing to teach is from the Prussian model, where we line the kids up in desks and we just lecture at them when we do these methods and we say it should work for everybody and it doesn't work, and so on and so on and so on. And when we do things that don't work, there's no accountability. There's nobody overlooking this and saying, this is failing. We got to stop. Time out. No. It's always somebody else's fault, because that's where the money lives. If you go back to the taxpayers and you say, the reason the kids aren't reading is we need more money. We don't pay the teachers enough. And nobody stops to say, hey, teacher, are you a crappy teacher because you don't get paid enough? Will paying you more make you a better teacher? Because that doesn't even pass the smell test. That's not common sense. They say, well, we need to train them more. They need more experience. You're talking about teachers who are like 10, 20, 30 years in the business. What? Maybe they had better outcomes. We look at their outcomes 30 years ago, they were better than now. They got worse? They got worse what they're teaching? That doesn't make any sense. You can't say more experienced teachers are better, but then look at their outcomes 30 years ago and they were better than now. That means they got worse. So none of it made sense. And for some bizarre reason, parents just went along for the ride. Parents believed the lie that they knew better, that schools knew better. They're the experts. You don't know anything. And it kept going and kept going and kept going. And they played your heartstrings. Don't you want your kids to learn? You're going to give more money, pay more taxes, blah, blah, blah. And the union, of course, was helpfully coming along to say that all the problems would be remedied by money. Has anyone stopped to look at how much money we have spent on public schooling in the last 50 years? Just total it up. Total it up for 1 year, never mind 50 years. And then look at the trajectory of literacy in this country. And I ask you, is this a system you want to put one more dollar into? So when we say things like we have to take back education, I'm like, what if you never had it? What are you taking back exactly? What is the system you are taking back? Can you take back your house? Your house is riddled with termites. The entire foundation is eaten apart by termites. The walls are half gone. The thing is rotted from the bottom up. And by the way, the roof has 75 holes in it. You going to save the house? How are you going to save the house? Wouldn't it be cheaper to tear the house down and start over again? And the irony is the people coming into the system are saying we have to dismantle all the systems of oppression. Did it ever occur to anyone that the school itself is a system of oppression? Did it ever occur to anyone that when you take your little child at 6 or 7 years old and you hand it over to a bunch of strangers, and those strangers spend 8 hours a day with your kid, and at the end of 13 years, your kid is a certain kind of person with a certain amount of information and worldview in their head, that maybe ignorance is a way of oppressing people? Did that ever occur to anybody? So I'm going to look back at some of these comments. I'm sorry. Let's see. Okay, the IQ problem is going to be exacerbated with the advent of AI taking most of the unskilled work. Believe it or not, we're still a little bit away from that happening. And the IQ problem, if you guys don't read Charles Murray, I do suggest that you do. I know he gets a bad rap, but you really should consider reading it, because the idea is, you can take a fertile seed, little corn kernel, it's fertile. Now, if you plant it in fertile soil, it will grow. If you plant it in the desert, it won't. So environment does matter. It's not just IQ. And we also have to remember that we're a big country full of people, and that when you get to the top, your very top and the very bottom, little tiny differences can make a big difference, because you're talking about a lot of people. So IQ is one of those tools that's kind of interesting and important to look at, and we should talk more honestly about it. And we should make sure that if we're teaching large groups of people in a standardized way, that we can't ignore it. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. We can't pretend everything is environment, because that's not true. So we can't throw aside the science of reading and teach to, ironically, to the highest common denominator in the math method that we teach reading, and then teach the lowest common denominator in math. I mean, we're all over the board contradicting ourselves. So it's an important thing to look at, but I think we just have to be honest about it. It's one of many factors. So let's see. What else do we have here? There are still ramifications of slavery, obviously, and most in the cultural realm, but to blame them on modern white supremacist system doesn't follow, considering the Asian make more than whites. Right. Yes. And again, if we're going back to IQ, they do have higher IQs. Okay. They just do, of a certain sort. They're also different kinds of IQ. So that's just a fact. And I mean, it doesn't offend me. It doesn't mean someone's superior, because what you do with that does matter. There's a little thing called a snapshot fallacy that the critical theorists operate in. They use the snapshot fallacy and nobody calls them on it. And that is that wherever you are now is where you're going to stay without outside influence, that like nothing is inside of you that either will hold you back or push you forward. And that things on the outside kind of, are more important than that, as opposed to maybe equal or possibly even less important. So they'll look at a kid who's doing well or who's white, and they just automatically assume you'll be fine. You'll be fine. You're reading in, first grade, you're doing math and you're okay. And we don't need to pay attention to you. We need to go help the most at-risk kids. And the assumption is that these kids will stay where they are. And they'll just keep staying where they are and stay where they are and stay where they are and stay where they are. And nothing could possibly get in the way of their achievement. And we don't need to worry about them at all. We just need to bring these kids up. And that's just not true. That's not true. The lie of equity is that there's this thing that will always stay the same. And we need to bring these people up and look, everybody's the same now. When in fact, what it really does is go like this, because you can't do that. You have to set a standard that you think is an appropriate standard. I would say 100% literacy for an industrialized nation. 100% should be your goal. There's no excuse. There's nobody who can't learn to read in this country, except somebody who is like severely disabled. Okay. And then you figure out what are the methods to get everybody to here. You don't leave the people who are already here behind and go, oh yeah, whatever, screw you. And you don't pretend that you can like focus only on these kids and like making everything come down to their level without negatively impacting these kids. That's not how it works. And at some point, you're going to have to say to these kids and their families, you guys got to step it up. You're going to have to participate in this. We can give you some scaffolding. We can help you out. We can do some things, give you books, give you tutoring, give you lessons. But if you're not going to reach out and grab it, we're going to keep going. We can't like keep coming down to your level and have you go, they'll come and get me. They'll come and get me. I'll just stay here. No, that's not how it works. And that's what we're doing right now. And this is why do Nigerian immigrants generally generate more wealth than Black Americans? Because they missed out on institutional racism that was there before. Obviously, that's what the critical theorist would tell you. I disagree. I think, first of all, just because somebody looks like another person phenotypically, you both have Black skin, doesn't mean that your culture is the same at all. That's what this whole notion of white culture is so much BS, because you have so many different ethnicities and regions that people with phenotypically white skin come from that are dramatically different. I mean, just look at white people who are Jewish versus white people who are some other ethnicity, and you'll see the level of academic achievement on paper is wildly different. Now, does that mean people are biologically different or possibly culturally different? You're not the same just because you look alike. And if you have people who've spent hundreds and hundreds of years or even thousands of years kind of evolving up, but really we know it only takes hundreds, evolving from on completely different sides of the ocean, this notion that even biologically they're the same just because they look the same in terms of their skin or facial features or hair texture or something like that is absurd. That it disregards everything we know about evolution. It just absolutely does. Now, can you say that because of the oppression in history that people being born in the United States who are Black and growing up were artificially held back in their own evolution and progression and development? Absolutely. Absolutely. That you'd be lying to say otherwise, because if you're not allowed to read for 100 years or more, and if you're not allowed to send your kids to school, or you're not allowed to have your kids in the good school, or you are held back from certain kinds of jobs that would cause you to need the kind of skills that that would improve your development and so forth, that's artificially holding you back. I'm not going to argue that point. That's a fact. But we are not there anymore, and we haven't been certainly since the civil rights movement. We've had laws against that. And there was a rising middle class even before the civil rights movement. There were kids in school doing exceptionally well. There were kids in schools at the same socioeconomic level as white kids who were doing better than the white kids, who had higher literacy rates, who were Black, in part because when you're not allowed to learn to read for so long, and now you are, like, you're not a slave anymore, you're allowed to read, now you're discriminated against. And there's terrible oppression, but no one is saying you can't read. You can literally have your own school and teach your own kids. Guess what? You put a high prize on that. You put a very high prize on learning to read and learn to do the things so that you can build your own businesses. Where do you think Black Wall Street came from? People just saying, we're going to go do it. You won't let us into yours. We're going to do our own. Okay. So what I believe happened is then after the fact, so Jim Crow and some other rules came in to artificially slam that down and stop it. And then even after that, after the civil rights laws were passed, you still had racists, in my opinion. You still had racists in the federal government, Lyndon Johnson being one of them, who didn't want to lose the problem represented, the dependency represented by people who'd been oppressed. So suddenly we have all these new ways to sort of infantilize people to keep them dependent. And of course, now they're trying to do it to all of us. Now that it's not racial anymore, it's still, they're trying to resuscitate racism to keep a certain percentage of people perpetually lower class, perpetually underrepresented. So they'll always have a vote, right? Always have that voting block. But now we're doing it also to middle class and working class white people. We're just going to print money like crazy, inflation like crazy. Oh, we're going to pass the PRO Act so you can't work for yourself and you have to go work for a giant corporation who conveniently funds our campaigns and so forth and so on. And there's a war against anybody who's not the at-home typing on their computer, elite journalists, political class, whatever. Everybody else is just going to become a serf. And we should all be working together. We shouldn't even be trying to take back those schools that were created by those people, in my opinion. We should all be working together, Black, white, Asian, anybody middle class and below, and anybody with sense who's above that, and say, because they're going to be lowered to that level pretty soon. And we should be joining hands and working together and saying, yeah, how about no more? How about we're sick of it? How about you don't get to tell us what we get to learn and what we don't get to learn, what we need to know, what we don't need to know? How about we decide that? How about we put our heads together and decide what our kids need to know so that we can advance and have our own skills? We're not going to listen to the power brokers anymore about it's a conflict of interest. First of all, you're like, let's take back the schools. The government's been running the schools since their inception. And if you look into the history of it, they were created for racist reasons and xenophobic reasons. Oh, we've got all these foreign immigrants coming. They speak all these different languages and so many of them are papists. Oh no, we have to assimilate them to be like us. Let's put them in a school. Oh, but we don't want them to really know too much because then they might actually, climb up and change things. We don't want that. So let's do the Prussian model, which was designed literally to keep people only at a certain level of intelligence to be sort of the workers. The worker class, they're good enough. And then we up here at the elite, we're like, we can be the philosopher kings that can tell them how to live. That's Woodrow Wilson on forward. That's John Dewey. That's everybody in the progressive movement. That's their whole deal. And so we should be working together, not separating. And they know that. The people in power know that we should be working together. So what do? They use our schools. Our kids are captive audience. They're required to be there. If you don't have another solution, you can't homeschool or put them in private school, your kid is compelled to be in the building with these people who truly believe that it is their job to teach your kid what they want your kid to know. And what they want your kid to know is what's going to change America to be what they want it to be. And if you don't agree with that, somehow you're all these bad things. As if you have no stake in this. They'll call you a stakeholder, but they don't really see you as a stakeholder. Because when you show up for that board meeting and you say, no, I actually love America and I love the Constitution. And while we are flawed and don't do everything perfectly, we have a Constitution that permits us to improve. We're self-reflective people. We are committed to self-improvement. And they want the improvement to be what they want it to be. And what they want it to be is Marxian. And now they're saying it openly. Capitalism is evil. Well, who says that? Marxists. Okay. The Constitution is inherently racist, so tear it up. Now, there'll be people who tell you, no, 1619 Project is great. And she says at the end of her essay that she loves the Constitution. Really? Because at the beginning, she says that the Constitution was inherently white supremacist from the beginning. It's just flawed from the outset because it was written by racist white people who owned slaves. She contradicts herself. So what was worth living up to if it was this inherently white supremacist document? It either is or it isn't. You don't get to have it both ways in the same essay. And if it is, then you have to allow that not every person who put that document together was a horrible racist or was somebody that we can't think is a good person, even by today's standards, just because at the time there were things that we find abhorrent. We aren't them. This isn't the 18th century, and so on. But they talk out of both sides of their mouths. And the reason they do that, of course, is to keep the critics at bay. If she finished up that essay where she started that essay, then people would see it for what it is. It's it's like the Communist Manifesto rewritten for American audiences. We need to tear it down because it's bad. I disagree. So as far as this cracks me up. Well, I'm not a white woman. I'm singular. I'm a white woman, and I certainly don't benefit more than white men. I don't benefit more than anybody inherently because of my skin color. I get what I put out there, and that's a fact. In fact, I'm a living, breathing example of how being born into a certain measure of privilege, whether it's because of your skin or your socioeconomic level, is absolutely no guarantee. That snapshot fallacy. Okay. I had certain privileges given to me, education and so forth. And I grew up in New York City. So I had this on paper privileged upbringing, but my family life was a freaking disaster. My environment was hell. My environment was tailor-made for somebody to grow up and be a basket case. Okay. I overcame that because I overcame that. And my upbringing of having money and so forth, that got me an education, and that's it. That's it. As soon as I was 18 years old, I didn't have any money. As soon as I was out on my own, I was poor. There were times I thought I was going to get evicted. I couldn't pay my bills. It didn't matter what daddy had or my grandparents had or whatever. That didn't matter because as a child, you only have what your parents are willing to give you. So I had to use whatever I had, whatever skills I had to figure things out for myself. And I've done so ever since. And I had several other giant setbacks that a lot of people don't have. Health issues, other family issues, divorce, so forth, to look at a person from the outside and say, oh, I know that you have more privilege than so-and-so and so-and-so is utter nonsense. There are Black people I know personally who not only were born into higher levels of privilege, but maintained that ongoing much higher than I've ever had. So it is utterly ludicrous to say that you could look at someone from the outside and decide what their life is going to be. That's determinism. I don't believe in determinism. If you do, knock yourself out. I don't. And I think teaching determinism to children is abusive. It's abusive. You are telling them there's no hope. You're telling them there's no purpose in even doing this. Why go to school? Why achieve? Why learn to read? Why learn to do math? What is the point? You're oppressed and you're in a system of oppression. And until these people get out of your way, it's all downhill from here. You're banging your head against a brick wall, little child. Why does the child have any motivation? And then if they go back home and things aren't so great at home, then they see that as a proof of your concept, of your theory. Now they're angry, they're sullen, they're hopeless. Are they more or less likely to resist temptations to do bad things in their environment? Are they more or less likely to harness their natural gifts and pursue something and be resilient and resourceful and move forward in their life and make a better life? I submit to you they're less likely. I think we're teaching kids to be hopeless. We're taking something away from them and we're abusing them. And that really doesn't matter where you start. Frederick Douglass was a slave, a literal slave, prohibited from learning to read. Somebody tried to teach him to read and she was disciplined for it, his master's wife. And he learned from that person that reading was the most important thing he could learn how to do because the guy said, reading makes a man unfit to be a slave. So do you start to see it in a different context now, why they might be resistant to using the science of reading? Why they aren't as concerned about the literacy rates dropping precipitously as others of us might be? Because maybe they do want us to be slaves, all of us. Did that ever occur to anybody? No. All that occurs to people is this kind of nonsense right here. America was built for white people. No, it wasn't. It doesn't even say in the Constitution, all white people are created equal, does it? It says all people. It doesn't say white people were born with certain inalienable rights, does it? No, it doesn't. And in fact, the 3/5 compromise was not done to disregard the humanity of Blacks. It was done for the exact opposite reason, because the South would not have joined the North and we wouldn't have had a country at all. And slaves might have continued to be slaves for longer had they not done that compromise and said to the South, you're not going to have that kind of power. We're not going to give you full credit for representation of people you don't treat as humans. There was quite a bit of debate about that from people who were abolitionists. And the first abolitionist society was founded in 1775, before the Declaration was signed. But we don't teach that to kids in history, do we? We just teach what the outcome was and for so long. And actually, if you add it up, it was 89 years. 89 years. 89 years too damn long. But it's not like it was 300 years of America being like that. No, it was not. You want to go complain to the British or complain to the French or complain to the Spanish, be my guest. But America? No. No. And we're not teaching that. We're not teaching that other countries were also awful. African countries especially were awful to their own people. This notion that it was this beautiful, bucolic place where everybody was treated just frolicking in the wilderness, free as a bird, that is undone by recent history. Go talk to the people of Zimbabwe or Rwanda. Go talk to people who are formerly the Belgian Congo. Go talk to the Belgians. Go talk to them about how to treat people. Shall we go over and ask the Uyghurs about slavery? Shall we ask the Libyans? There's slavery going on right now in this world. And I don't see any of the same people who are so concerned about chattel slavery raising. They're lecturing us. Disney is lecturing us while they're busy making movies practically adjacent to a concentration camp. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm sick of it. And so when I see parents going, we need to take back schools, I'm like, take them back for what? You never had them. So what does that look like to you? What does taking it back look like? To me, it takes like firing everybody, but you can't, can you? You can't fire them. These are elected officials that you people elected. They're politicians. Your school board are politicians, and your teachers' unions are increasingly just political. That's all they are. Have you ever gone? I will tell you right now, go to your state's teacher association page right now. Open a browser and go there and see what's on their homepage, and then click on advocacy or click on legislative priorities. In the search thing, type in equity and see what comes up at your state's teacher association. And I challenge especially red staters to do this. You go do it right now. Go to Indiana. Check out Indiana's. Type in equity. Actually, you don't have to. Go to their homepage of the teacher association and see what the first thing is that you see. Now, understand that your school boards are required by law. School board members, when they're elected, are required to get training to be school board members. How do they get that training? Where do they get it? I wonder where these politicians who just ran a campaign, they may seem like your neighbor Susie, but they're politicians. How do they get the training? They go to the school board association in your state. Go to the legislative priority tab for your school board association, and what do you see there? Type in equity in their search. You'll start to see it. Also notice how many teachers unions and school board associations have hidden their training webinars behind a paywall, behind a membership wall. I did research on Pennsylvania's, I don't know, it was like 4 months ago or something, and it was all out there. It was all out there. I did a video about it. About a month later, I went back. It's all behind a membership login now. You can only see the surface of it. They're getting smart. They're hiding it from you. They're hiding it from you. These are people that they're either quote unquote volunteers, school board members, or they're getting paid with tax dollars. And they're members of these organizations where they get trained to be your school board member. And you can't look at what they're using for training material. If that doesn't give you pause, I don't know what else does. Then what you should do is go to your state university, go to the graduate education, go to education, where they go to get their teaching credentials, okay? And Google equity there, Google diversity there, and see what teachers are being taught. Read the different course descriptions. Those are your teachers. So you can pass all the bans you want on critical race theory in schools. What are you going to do? Fire all the teachers? Because it's coming in their brains. It's coming in their worldview. These are people, even those who are veteran teachers, were shamed, guilted, and pressured into going to these trainings and told, you either get on board with this and teach this stuff in your classroom, and that includes intersectionality, comprehensive sex ed, gender theory, queer theory, Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, anti-racism, by all the names, social emotional learning, culturally responsive education. They're all of a sort. They're all of a sort. And they're all designed to get inside your kid's head. And what I don't see is parents just going to the school board meetings and saying, why are the reading scores in our district down X% from last year, and then X% from the prior year, and X% from the year before that? Because they'll go, oh, pandemic. Oh, how about the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before? How come the trajectory is like this instead of like this? If you're such experts and you want my money. Talk about literacy. You don't even have to talk about critical race theory, because they're using your kids' time for activism, not for teaching. That's what they're doing. And you can call them on the critical race theory all day long, and they'll just, we're shutting down public comment. We're not going to have any more of this abusive commentary. Jeff, thank you so much for the super chat. I'm at my best when I become a crazy person. Thank you. I'm very passionate about these issues because actually I really do care about these kids. These are helpless children. They didn't choose this. They didn't choose this. And I'm not talking about any specific race. Every little kid is born into this country. They're born on this soil with a birthright. You know what it is? Liberty. It's liberty. It's freaking liberty. That's what it is. And we, as their parents and grandparents and neighbors and the taxpayers who pay for the education that's going to go inside their heads, we have to be accountable to ourselves. Are we holding ourselves accountable to make sure that's what's going on? That we're passing this on to our kids? Ronald Reagan said it. Liberty is only ever one generation away from disappearing. So we can certainly talk about critical race theory and Marxism and this lesson and that lesson and separating and teaching people to hate each other. But we're at that point, we're moving deck chairs around on the Titanic, guys. The reason this garbage is in the school in the first place is that we have an entire education system that is working on a different project than you and I want them to work on. We thought they were passing on the basic skills a human being needs to preserve their own individual liberty. The ability to read, write, do math, have basic common sense and life skills, preservation of personal boundaries, some decent social interaction rules, the golden rule, don't take what's not yours, don't demand what you didn't earn, the concept of merit. These are the things that our country was founded on. That's how we became the country that has all this prosperity. They're working on a totally different project. They're saying that was all a failure or fake from the outset. They're saying merit is literally a tool of oppression. Do you want your brain surgeon being someone who got there because equity? Do you want the person who builds your bridges and your highways and your airplanes to have gotten there because they had to have equal physical representation of people who look a certain way? Or do you want people to be encouraged to develop their natural skills? Because there is a distribution of them across all races, guys. There's a distribution across all races. There's not one race that's just always better than another race. That is ludicrous. And even if there were, I don't care if my neurosurgeon doesn't look anything like me. I couldn't care less if he worships a different God. Are you the very, very best neurosurgeon that ever could work on me and cut my brain open? That's what I want. I couldn't care less what language you speak at home. I don't care what your favorite food is. I don't care what kind of music you listen to. All I care about is that you got where you got by merit. Because you're about to cut into my freaking head. Or you're about to fly my airplane. You're about to operate on my baby. In utero. There are in utero surgeries, you guys. Do you want that being by somebody who got where they got, weren't enough fill in the blank? And that's not talking. Sorry, I'm glitching. I don't know what's going on. I think somehow when I freak out, the system freaks out. Thank you very much, Sydney Kendall, Barbara, for your super chat. So what are we taking back exactly? The teachers who work in these schools have a different agenda than you do. They just do. And the simple way to find out, I posted it on Twitter the other day, but I posted a list of questions, not one of which was about CRT. Not a single one. There were questions like, do you believe the United States is inherently racist? Do you believe the Constitution should be torn up? Do you believe merit is real? Do you believe that race is a social construct or that invented for political gain and political power? Or do you believe that people are inherently different to their DNA because of the color of their skin? Do you believe that all children can learn and should be taught in ways that are objectively, evidence-based, where we have research to back it up? Or do you want to turn school into like therapy? Do you think it's a teacher's job, teacher who doesn't know these kids at all, to say, how you doing? What's going on at home? How are you feeling? How's your soul? How's your heart? Do you want your teacher being like that for your kid? Or do you want them to teach the material, certainly be warm and kind, certainly work on being effective? You can't be effective if you project that you don't care at all. But you need to care about their academic success. What's going on at home is really not your business unless they or their parents want to make it your business. And if something is looking really awry, you might go to the parent and say, is there anything I need to know about? that I can do to help your child be successful? And if they say no, it is not your business to butt in. It's not. Move on. We need to learn about boundaries again. Some people don't want the government in their freaking living room or their bedroom, and certainly not their child's bedroom or bathroom. And can we talk about that for a second? What does it mean to take back schools that think it is appropriate to teach your child in elementary school about anal sex and to give them steps, literally like the detailed steps on how to have sex? What, do you think that school is remotely philosophically aligned with you? Because I don't. I don't think that you can just, opt out of that and then send your kid into the next class. That is a building full of people who don't see you, the parent, as having the authority over the child and what the child learns in terms of values, private values, and understanding what your child's ready for emotionally and not ready for. That's disrespectful. So how are you going to get rid of that? How are you going to deal with that by saying, don't teach this lesson plan? You can't. That's an attitude. That's an attitude. That's a belief system. How are you going to get rid of that belief system? Are you going to show up at the school board and say, all of you believe the wrong things? Let me give you another analogy. Astrology. The whole school board believes that we should change how we educate to be around the stars and what our star signs say and what our astrological signs say should be for our kids. And from now on, your kid will have to give their birth date, time of date, longitude, latitude, etc. And they're going to put together a chart for your kid. And their new IEP is going to be their astrological chart. And we're going to follow the astrological chart. And that's how we're going to teach your child what they need to know. In fact, we're going to even guide them towards a career based on what their astrological chart says, because, that's what we believe. There is as much evidence that that would be effective to helping them in their later life as critical theory. There is as much evidence of that. But we're not asking for evidence. We're just saying, don't do this. Please don't do this. How about show me the evidence? You're supposed to be evidence-based. You're making these statements like, we're going to do this because this. Show me this. How do you know that this outcome is related to racism? How do you know the kids can't read because racism? How do you know? Show me. Who are the racist teachers? Did you identify them and fire them? Which are the racist practices? Did you identify them and remove them? And how do you know that they were racist? Can you give us a definition of racism that is consistent across the board? Or does it shift and change and move and, based on who's asking? But we're not asking these questions. We're just, get this out of the classroom. And people will say, well, Deb, we have to start somewhere. Oh, okay. So you get that lesson plan out of the classroom. And now you go back and you look and, oh, good, that lesson plan's gone. And you kind of go back to sleep. Meanwhile, they've decided, what we'll do, guys? They want us to teach the Constitution. They want us to teach the Federalist Papers. They want us to teach this stuff. That's fine. We'll do it with a critical lens. We'll just take it apart using our critical theory. We'll still teach the kids about oppression and this and that. We won't do the, this exercise or that exercise. We'll come up with something different. We'll change the words and move along, and everybody will think it's all better. But it's not. Until the schools that your children attend are working on the same project as you, what's the point? Why are you even sending your kid there? And if you say, well, how else are they going to learn to read? Are they learning to read? Are they learning to do math? Are you sure? Are they learning to think? Are they learning to write? Have you had your kid write something for you recently? Or did you just look at their grades and go, but they're getting A's. They're getting A's. Okay. I challenge you to ask your high school kid, middle school kid, whatever, sit down and write a cogent paragraph. Just ask them to write a paragraph about the latest thing they read. I don't care if they read an article or something on Instagram. But, what's your favorite meme and why? What's your favorite video game and why? Write me a paragraph. Explain why it's good. See if they can do it. See if they can do it. They can do a good job. Great. Awesome. Maybe their school taught them something. If they can't, if they don't capitalize the first letter of each sentence, if they don't know where to use a comma or a period and they're past 5th grade, then maybe you shouldn't hold that A up as like something to be so proud of. Because I teach Chinese kids, guys. I wake up every morning at the butt crack of dawn to teach Chinese kids English. And people say, how can you do that? I'm like, well, because I need to pay my bills. Okay? So that's what I do to pay my bills. And also to keep an eye on what they're doing. so I can come back and tell you what they're doing. And guess what they learn when they're 6 and 7 years old? They learn pronouns, proper pronouns, how to use them properly. Guess what our school districts are doing? Ditching pronouns completely. They're saying we're not even going to teach pronouns at all. So first we moved to change to whatever pronouns you want. And now they're saying for the kids who are getting special tutoring and so forth, they're working on them first. We're not going to bother correcting pronouns. I assure you, the Chinese kids I teach are learning pronouns. They're learning English grammar. I have Chinese 7 and 8-year-olds that know English grammar better than American kids that I know who are in middle school. And you might say, well, I mean, what's the big deal? So what? The big deal, so what? If you can't speak your own language properly, how easy do you think it is for your government to manipulate the living shit out of you? How easy is it, do you think, to tell you what the Constitution says, whether it says it or it doesn't, if you can't read it? How easy is it to draft laws that violate the Constitution if you don't even know what it says and what it protects? Meanwhile, I'm seeing teachers saying, students have a right to not be unsafe and have their feelings hurt in class. They have a right to feel this and feel that and feel the other. No, they don't. They actually don't. They don't have a right to feel any particular thing. They have a right to not have somebody violate their physical boundaries. They have a right to get the education because their parents have paid for it. And that's law in the state and at the federal level. They have a right to not be physically and verbally abused by the teacher because that's a government employee. But no, I'm sorry. We cannot guarantee your right to not have your feelings hurt. That's ridiculous. That's utterly ridiculous. And parents have a right to see what their kids are learning. They just do. And anybody who tells you you don't is lying to you. But the reason they can lie to you and lie to so many people is there's such a large percentage of parents who are illiterate, can't read the laws, don't know what's going on and what's true and what's not true, because they weren't taught either. Do you see where this goes? It's a conflict of interest to have government school, period. So what are you taking back? I submit to you, you're taking back your kid, not the school. You're taking back your child. It's your child. And taxpayers, you should be taking back your tax dollars. If you don't have kids and you're paying for this, you're paying for your someday government. You're paying for the people who are going to make laws governing you and your business. If you had a business shut down this past year, if you were told you had to wear a mask, if you were told now that you have to get a vaccine or you lose your job, the people telling you that were educated by these people and are the ones influencing the education by these people. They're the ones in charge right now. It has nothing to do with whiteness or blackness or anything else, because most of them are white still. White people are still 60% of the non-Hispanic, non-black population. 60%, still slim majority. So most of the people running things and truly oppressing everybody, including black people who own businesses and, are told you have to get a vaccine, you have to wear a mask, you have to do this, you have to do that. We're like, nowhere in the Constitution do I see any of this. In fact, I see quite the opposite. I have due process rights. You don't get to inject something into my body or tell me that I have to have it because you said so. The government doesn't control viruses, you guys. It doesn't control your immune system. But the reason we don't know that, or the reason we think that maybe it should, is because we weren't taught how to think and we weren't taught what the Constitution actually says. We're just told it's bad. It's racist. It's bad. So what's the impetus to even read it? Why would a kid even want to read it? It's assigned. They go, well, we assign it in school and we talk about it. Do you? Do you think the kids actually read it after you told them what a racist document it is? I have mine right here. You tell somebody this is racist, why do they read it? Especially if you're black, why would I read this? Why would I want to know what my rights are if you tell me it's racist and only supports white people? I don't even think it applies to me. I'm not going to read it. So now how easy it is to violate my rights. Super easy. Super easy. All right, let's see. What do I got here? The good news on the left is multiracial, on the right is also the race war is manufactured by the corporations and Hammer's useful idiot. Yeah, well, Hammer is a useful idiot. I don't know how useful he is, but he's an idiot. And it is manufactured by the people in power. It's government, it's corporations. We have a technocracy. We have an oligarchy. We don't have capitalism. We don't have capitalism. It's ridiculous. I mean, we don't have a free market. We have at best a mixed market, which we've had for at least 100 years. Okay. And now it's gotten less mixed and it's a lot more on the side of government runs things. We're getting dangerously close to fascism. Dangerously close. People are like, how can you say that? And I'm like, well, there's talk of censorship, literally. People want the government to do more to censor us. The military and industrial complex certainly is going strong. We're back fighting wars that we shouldn't be fighting. And on top of it all, the government goes to every corporation and says, this is how you must conduct business. And increasingly, they're making it about race. So it's, how different is it, really? The only corporations that can, direct that are the ones that are so massive, so huge that they can literally like move people's opinions, and the government knows it. So I'd say they're like this. They're little kissing cousins right now. It's hard to tell where these people assume power and these people lose it. I really don't know. But I know that this has nothing to do with capitalism and has nothing to do with the free market. Nothing at all. This is government and an unholy alliance with gigantic multinational corporations to do things that no free marketeer ever thought about. It's much more fascistic, oligarchical, et cetera. And we're not teaching this to our kids. We're not. We're saying this is capitalism. That's not even true. That's like not even true. It would be more accurate, and it's still not accurate, for me to say it's a communist country. Okay, it's a socialist country. No, it isn't. There are socialistic elements of it, absolutely, like education, like healthcare, already with Medicare, like Social Security. But no, it would be an overstatement to say it's a socialist country or a communist country, but that's what they're saying when they say it's a capitalist country. No, it for shit sure isn't. Would that it were, but it's not. And drop the StreamYard link. I'm not debating you. I don't debate people who are come in bad faith. So, anybody have any thoughts specifically on the so-called goal of taking back education? Do you think it's possible? If you think it's possible to take back the schools that exist, so whether it's the physical infrastructure, whether it's turning the teachers around, whether it's getting rid of the teachers union, please drop a comment. If you don't drop a comment, I'm curious where you guys stand. Do you think, nope, nobody has an idea? Okay. I guess I've already said, I don't think there's anything to take back. I think all we can do is take back our kids and take back our dollars. Fight for school choice. And by that, I don't mean vouchers, because that's still the government deciding. Andrew B says, I think it's done. Okay. I agree. I mean, obviously I agree. Let's see. Yep. The only thing I could think of doing was taking my son out of it. That's what I did with my kids. And I know there are people out there who say, I can't take my kids out. And to them, I would say, can you afford to leave them in? Can you handle the idea that we're not even as far along in this as we could get? In other words, like what you're seeing now that you find so horrifying could get worse. So how okay are you with the government deciding that your child's poor outcomes are your fault? Not this. We tried everything. Still not performing, so it's your fault. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to remove the child from your home. How do you feel about that? Because that could be coming too. Once you allow the government into your home and have access to your child, you are allowing for that possibility. It has already happened to many people, by the way. And it could very well happen to more. So I personally say, if you don't want the government in your life and telling you how to live and telling you how to raise your child, you should really think twice about whether you can afford to leave them in or have them go. Because I can't afford to have them out. It's like, can you afford to have them in? Can you afford the possibility that they will screw up teaching your kid to read, and now your kid needs specialized instruction and tutors and all kinds of other things because they're not following the IEP. Now you need to hire a lawyer. You think you can afford a lawyer to make them obey the law, IDEA, and get your kid what they need? Do you think so? It can get very expensive very fast. But guess what happened now? You missed your 3 or 4 year window of opportunity for your kid to learn to read the right way. You could have done that. And people say, oh, I can't. I'm not a teacher. You don't need to be a teacher. You don't even need to have a college degree. You barely need to have a high school diploma. If you can read, if you are literate, and I know people who don't have high school diplomas are more literate than people who do. If you can read well, you can teach a child to read. You can. with minimal expenditure. There are all kinds of free tools on the internet for letter sounds. You can Google a letter sound and let your kid listen to it. You can make the letter sound yourself if you're, but Google if you're not sure. Anything. There are grammar lessons. There are all kinds of things out there for free. I can help you find them if you want advice, but you can do it. It's a matter of solving the childcare problem. It's not the education problem. It's the childcare problem. So you have to decide, can I afford for my child to be miseducated? Can I afford for my child to be socialized away from our family's values and our family's beliefs and what we think is best for our kid into what the state thinks is best? Can I afford to have my kid at age 10 being my adversary? Take a gander at Mao's China, because that's what's coming. There are kids already coming home and saying, Mom, Dad, you're idiots. You don't know what you're talking about. The teacher knows better than you because the teacher's a teacher. You're not a teacher, Mom. My teacher's a teacher. Because teachers are saying stuff like this, by the way. The teachers are saying stuff like this to kids. They're literally explicitly saying, your parents don't know, or your parents are lying to you. So you really need to know what you're risking and then also what you're missing. This is another thing I tell people. I can preach all day about what to run away from, but I want you to know what you'd be running to. Like I said, better reading skills, better math skills, access to better literature than they're ever going to give your kid access to. Books they might actually enjoy, that feed their interests, their passions, their values, their sense of self-esteem. Who am I? What am I? Right now, they're selling you a bill of goods telling you that self-esteem comes from seeing people who look like them in the literature. Really? Is that where you derive self-esteem? Is looking at other people who look like you? That seems very shallow. I don't actually think that's true. I think it could be true if what you're doing is showing people who are success. If you need to take kids who are in a situation where they don't have a lot of hope, or they don't look around their neighborhood and see a lot of success, and you want to show them success, so you show them people who look like them who've succeeded, there's value in that because there is an association that the brain makes. But to say the kid can't learn to read at all until they do that is not true. That places too much emphasis on it, and you're looking at it for as a panacea, and it's not a panacea. It serves a very specific purpose in a limited way, but it's not, unless all the books look just like the kid, they're not going to learn to read. This is just not true. And there are lots of great stories they're not going to have access to, and lots of interesting books that if you're going to rule them out, looking for things that exactly reflect what they look like. We're such a pluralistic society with so many different ethnicities, you can't possibly cover all your bases. So the best you can hope to do is kind of get some representation. But like I said, it's more important to connect the dots between success and hope and people who look like them. If the message they've gotten in their community is that that's important, you shouldn't be planting that seed. No teacher should plant a seed where it may not have been planted. Imagine this. Imagine immigrant parents who brought their kids here from Mexico for a better life. We're always told it's for a better life. It's to escape horrors unimaginable, right? So they're here for a better life and they send their kids to the school. And the teacher says, oh, yeah, they hate you. Yeah, I don't know about that better life. It's just so out of reach because so many people you're oppressed or prejudiced against you. It's terrible, whatever. Meanwhile, at home, the parents are like, you can do anything. We're going to America so we can have a better life. And look, we're starting our better life and it's better than where we came from. And the school's going, no, that's just not true. These people are terrible. And I like you, but no, everybody else. Now the parent can't even instill that in their own kid because there's this conflicting message hammering them down every day, and they're an authority. First of all, they speak the native tongue of the country, so they're they have an important. They work for the government. They're a government employee. You can't underestimate that. This sort of lab coat a teacher. Let's see. This is a really great point that Carrie makes here. Why is it not working? Okay. Some of the first books kids read have animal characters. Yes. And that is intentional for exactly this reason. If it's an animal character, it's universal. It's not human in the first place. And kids will project onto animal characters their own qualities and their themselves in a way that's actually healthy. It's actually a good thing. Okay. You can imagine yourself a teddy bear, imagine yourself a rabbit, imagine yourself a turtle or a frog or a toad or whatever. And that's actually a good thing. So that's part of why we do it. And it's also, by the way, why Dr. Seuss, the much maligned Dr. Seuss, used these imaginary characters in so many of his books, because kids relate to that. And it doesn't matter where you come from. So contrary to popular belief, he was a great guy for early reading. Am I still glitchy? I'm really sorry, you guys. So let's see, what else have we got here? Yes, they indoctrinate the parents too. Absolutely. There are now schools doing parent trainings in equity education and social emotional learning, and the parents don't know or feel they have the knowledge to question this. They don't know what questions to ask. That's part of why I set up this channel, is to say to parents, hey, did it ever occur to you to ask them how they know that the reason their kids are doing poorly is because of racism? And if they tell you, because look at the result. The result is on racial lines, therefore it must be racism. No, you have a right to say, that's not really enough information. You're pointing at an outcome as evidence for the cause of the outcome. But so many people don't understand that that's logic. That's illogic. And partly because they weren't taught, they weren't educated properly. We've now come on, like I said, this has been going on for at least 50 years, if not longer. The schools have been racist and xenophobic since their outset. They've not been teaching kids how to think across the board in all the schools. That was still being done largely in the home, in the church, in the community organizations, when you'd go to your, Cub Scout meeting or your Girl Scout meeting or whatever, and you were having to deal with people and do things and live in the world. Our kids don't live in the world as much as they used to. John Taylor Gatto talks about that. He talks about kids used to go out of their house, go outside to play, go down to the park by themselves, go find their friends down the street, run to the store to get a gallon of milk for their mom when they were 10. They lived in the world to a much greater degree. So they saw evidence around them of like how people function, how people work, how people interact with each other. They've got us now. These kids are like, either totally isolated at home outside of the world this last year, or they're going into a building and going home and going into a building and going home and going into a building and going home. And all they know is what they're told. And then they bring CNN into the classroom now. CNN has this great big contract of CNN Kids, and they tell them what's important. And it's, of course, propaganda. And that's all they know of the world. So they're gaslit all day long. And if you then try to show them something that contradicts that, they think you're the one lying to them. I've seen it. I taught a middle school class, 6th and 7th graders. I was teaching them debate. I led a debate class sort of on a volunteer basis. And they weren't paying me, so I could kind of run it the way I wanted to run it. And I had to go backwards to define terms like rich and poor for these kids, because they were so sure they knew what these words meant. And they didn't believe me that different people have different definitions of these words. They didn't believe me. They were like, no, this means this. I'm like, let's look at it. So then I went around the room and I showed them how even in the classroom, even amongst their own peers, there were 5 or 6 different definitions of these terms. And they were like, how can this be? Well, that means if you have 6th and 7th graders who are literally shocked that different people in the classroom have a different point of view about what a word like rich means or a word like poor means, that means nobody's been asking them questions and comparing and contrasting their answers in a way that wasn't like, you're right and you're wrong. And then I even asked them, I said, who's right? Who's right? Who's wrong? And they couldn't answer me because there isn't a right or a wrong. And that's why these words are not really useful in debate. You have to give more information. And that's how I taught that lesson of like, you can't just toss around a word like rich. You can't just toss out around a word like oppressed. Define what you mean by oppression, because your definition might be very different from someone else's. Look at today. Oppression equals, you said mean words. Well, I can assure you that wasn't oppression when we were in school. Oppression was slavery. Oppression was like you're literally precluded by law from doing something, like sitting at a lunch counter or getting a job or getting credit if you're a female, for example, before it was legal for somebody like me to get credit without being married and getting it through my husband. That could be classified as oppression. But simply saying, I am X color, I'm oppressed, or somebody said a mean word to me, or somebody remained silent when they were asked for their opinion, that is oppression. This is where we are now. And the reason we could get here is that nobody, parents least of all, demanded definitions for these words. So when they throw up words like equality or equity and diversity and inclusion, we went, oh yeah, I know what that means. No one stopped to think, do I know what that means? Do I know what they mean when they say it? Are we on the same page here? Do I think I know what it means, but I'm not really sure? And too many people are embarrassed to ask. They're embarrassed to say, what do you mean? Equity what? Like, what will that look like when we're done? What's the goal? Equity, we need to have equity education. What is the tangible goal when we're done? Everybody achieves the same? Everybody has an A? Everybody can read? Everybody can do math? At what level? Where, like, is there any allowance for someone doing better? Or we all have to do the same? And what is that level that we have to do the same as? Nobody's asking. Nobody's asking. So let's see. Let's see. I was called an extremist by my neighbor who is an elementary school principal. When I asked him about CRT, he said CRT is fake and they only have equity, inclusion, anti-racist training. Okay. And they're going to do that. They're going to do that a lot more. That is why I'm trying to encourage my audience not to use the term CRT anymore and to hammer away at equity and inclusion terminology and demand definitions for equity. What is that going to look like, principal? How will you know you got it? How will you know you're done? And if he says, well, we'll never be done, and say that doesn't sound like a worthy goal if you can't measure it. We're paying tax dollars. This is the United States of America. You're supposed to be presenting something that is equally accessible to all people. Now, I want you guys to know something. I listened to a Department of Education webinar last week. I went through some of it on this channel the other night. I couldn't go through all of it or we would have been here for 3 hours. But there was a point, I'm going to go back and try to clip it, where one of the participants said, everybody needs to get used to the idea that equity means if you have less, you get more. That is anti-American. Now, we can have a conversation or debate all day long about how that makes public education inherently flawed because different people need different things, and that is true. That is why I don't believe in public education, because different people do need different things. And when you ask your government to provide it, you're either definitely not going to get it, okay? Because we can't. Like, legally, we can't do that. We can't give some people more than other people because everybody paid for it. So you're either not going to get what you need, or you're going to get more than you deserve, and somebody else is going to get a whole lot less, and that's not legal. That's just not legal. We don't do that in any other institution. We don't say, oh, you know what? We've decided you could afford a lawyer because we decided. So we're not going to give you a public defender because we decided. But they can't afford it. So they need a lawyer more. And so we're going to get them, and we'll make sure they get a good lawyer because we've decided you can afford a better lawyer. But they're doing that in education. They are deciding based on your race and your zip code what you need and what you can afford without consulting you. Without consulting you. And that's going to result in inequity. So equality like they want it, equity like they want it, is intensely unfair in the sense that everybody's not going to have equal access to equal amounts of stuff, which is the American way. Like it or leave it. That's how it is. If you don't like it, if you think, well, that's not right, because then some people who don't need as much are going to get the same amount as people who need more, then you should oppose public schools. Then you should want school choice. You should be up there at the front of the line demanding school choice for that exact reason, because it's your tax dollars. If you don't like the idea that your kid has more of a need than somebody else's, but they're getting the same as you, school choice is your answer, not make that kid have less. That makes you an asshole. I'm sorry, but that does. You don't get to do that. You don't get to take some of their tax dollars because your kid needs more. What you should be fighting for is your tax dollars or your portion thereof to go do what your kid needs. You don't put it on somebody else. That's the problem with public education in the first place, is it sets up something that's inherently unequal because people are different and people have different needs, and you're not going to be able to individualize enough. And so what they're doing now is they've said, we've made a value judgment. And we've made a philosophical decision. Our philosophical decision is that we want to cater to the lowest, and our value judgment is they deserve it more. And we've decided that people who already have this color skin, this amount of income, this level, this zip code, this, and this, we presume them to be fine. And they don't need our attention, but they do. So you're going to get whatever you get. And you better hope that your kid needs what they're giving to them, because that's all you're going to get. So I think, really, when you think about taking back the schools, you should turn it around to taking back your kid and your kid's rights and your rights as a taxpayer. What does your child need? What does your family need? When you had children, you had something in mind. You may not have given it a ton of thought, but somewhere you had this idea of like, I want my child to be happy and achieve their potential and have a, reasonably unfettered life. Like, I don't want them to struggle so hard they're miserable, but I doubt you wanted them to have it completely stress-free, right? You knew that life is what it is. And you maybe hoped they'd have a certain set of values and think that certain things are important and more important than other things, et cetera. You had some project in mind when you had kids. If it's not what the school has in mind, or if it's diametrically opposed to what the school has in mind, you thinking you can take that back for you or your kid is delusional. I'm sorry to put such a fine point on it, but that's the reality. We're not going back to, so if you watch Hollywood movies and they're like, the kids are in the hallway and going, hey, my teacher and I'm going to school and we have prom and then we're going to have the cheerleaders and the football games. If you're living in some Hollywood fantasy land about what public school is or ought to be like, or maybe back in your own childhood and going, but I loved public school and it was perfectly fine for me. It's not any of that anymore. And I think if you're honest with yourself and you look back at your own public school, it was kind of boring. I kind of sat through most of my classes hoping, they'd be over. I had one good teacher. I had two really great teachers. In 13 years, I remember the names of like 3 people who were my teachers, and they were awesome, but the rest were eh. Okay, so in other words, I think we romanticize our own pasts about these school experiences. I went into teaching because I wanted to be like the good teachers I had and be one more of the good ones and not be one of the bad ones. And then I found out when I got to the classroom that was not going to be allowed. That in order to be a good teacher by the school's definition, I was going to have to violate every value I have. And to me, personally, my integrity was more important than a job. So I left. But other people have a different calculus. I don't know. And when I had kids, same thing. I was like, I'm homeschooling them. There's no question in my mind I'm homeschooling them. And I had my first child in 2003. So I did homeschool. But then, as fate would have it, I ended up divorced and it wasn't my choice anymore. I did not put my kids in the public school willingly. I'll leave it at that. But thankfully, I was able to get them back out when they were old enough to demand to come back out because it was awful. And even my eldest told me today when I'm showing her some of these lesson plans and some of the stuff, she's 17. She's going into her senior year. And she said, I think, Mom, it was even better when I was in school. Like, that's how rapidly it's gone downhill. She said it was pretty bad, but it wasn't this bad. So they have really amped it up. And I don't know how you slam the door on that barn. The horse is off and running. It's gone. I don't know what you're taking back. So anyway, let's see, way up in the chat. What did I miss something you guys wanted me to talk about? The goal is utopian socialism, which never reaches its goal. That is so true. They still live in a fantasy world. Now, it's important to note, guys, that part of why they live in this little fantasy world where they can perfect our children and they can perfect society is they were not taught about the perils of communism. They literally weren't taught it. Like, I've asked my kids, and then I even have tutored and taught in schools in the past 20 years. So I know they were not taught about Mao. They were not taught about Stalin. They were not, even when they were taught about Hitler, they were taught that Hitler was like a far right extremist. They were taught about a little bit about the Holocaust, but they weren't taught about his economic policies. They weren't taught about his educational policies. They weren't taught even about the details of his racialism, not just his racism, but his racialism. They weren't taught about the fact that he considered Germans to be victims, that he was a, quote, anti-racist. He said Part of how he picked his scapegoats was that they were against the German people, the German folk. He had to protect the German people from these horrible people. So there's too much similarity. So they don't teach that aspect of it. Ever since they adopted the Howard Zinn version of American history, which goes back at least to the 80s, they've been teaching a communist version of American history, which is basically that America's bad. America is just bad and oppressive and a failure and hypocrisy and all these things in our documents. It's just a lie. It's a big lie, guys. That's what they've been taught. And now those kids are teachers. Those are your kids' teachers. That's all they know. So why would you be afraid of the equivalent of Mao's Cultural Revolution, or the Russian Revolution for that matter, if you never learned it? Now look at Nicole Hannah-Jones, author of the 1619 Project, who brags like she's proud of the fact that in her history major, she didn't study any Western European history. How can you effectively deal with the founding of this country and the origin of slavery in this country if you do not study Western European history? Why would you brag about that? It's how the University of North Carolina doesn't find that to be a glaring problem in her scholarship. I do not know, but that's where we are. And yes, Hitler invented CRT, critical race theory. Yes. Everything was a power struggle between the German people and Jews. He called it international Jewry. He called capitalism a Jewish economy. Every single thing that he didn't like, that he was trying to demonize, he attributed to one group of people, just like now. It is what these collectivist, totalitarian, utopian people do, is they can't sell you their idea in real terms. They can't say, so what we need to do is get rid of all of these people. And then when we get rid of all these people, we can rebuild this thing this way. But you really shouldn't be smart enough to understand anything beyond what I want you to understand, because then you'll be miserable if you are smart. So you shouldn't be smart. You should only be smart enough to do the things I want you to do. Like if you heard somebody saying that, you'd be like, what? So they don't do that. They create all this fear and threat and anger and resentment, and it's all lies. It's all lies. Jewish science. Yes, now we have the other ways of knowing, and objective science is white man's science and all of this. No, it's not. It's science. It's either science or it's not science. And there's no such thing as the science. Science is a process. It's a way of studying. It's a way of observing the world and documenting it and then studying it some more. You're not done. There's no the science. And they will tell you that CRT is the truth. Critical race theory is the truth. It's not even a truth. It's barely a theory in scientific terms, certainly not in social science. And it kills me that people will physically attack Charles Murray for his deep level of scholarship in social science. And they will say, oh, he's a racist and this and that because he's looking at data honestly and openly and just saying, well, I'm just telling you what the data says. I'm not passing any. I don't like what the data shows, but critical race theory is not racist. Somehow that's okay. I love this. I'm frozen again and doing a goofy hand gesture. So anyway, I'm coming up on an hour and a half. So I'm going to quit soon because I'm just like ranting. But I came on here today because I had so many things on my mind about this. I keep seeing stuff on Twitter. Before I go, I do want to show you a couple of things that I think are really, really important. I've talked a little bit today about self-esteem. You're going to hear a lot in coming days and months about social emotional learning. You're going to hear it from the government. You're going to hear it from your kids' schools if you're sending your kids back to school. And you might be reassured that like, oh, well, social emotional learning, that sounds different than critical race theory. That sounds good, right? Right? They're going to be very sensitive to other people. And so they won't be mean to my kid because social emotional. Well, I want you to understand that that is not necessarily true. So what I'm going to show you is a couple of things about what that means. All right. So first, they call it culturally responsive education is another word for sort of social, emotional, culturally responsive. So I'm going to share my screen and show you a little bit about what that actually means, because you might not be aware of what they mean by that. All right, now I've got to share the screen. Okay. Gonna take me a second. Okay. Here we go. This is gonna show. All right, there it is. Critically examining whiteness in culturally responsive education. This is Northwestern University. Northwestern University. Culturally responsive teaching is responsive to students' lived experiences. There's that phrase, lived experiences, cultural repertoires of practice, linguistic resources, and other ways of knowing and being in this world. So culturally responsive education is the sort of the way they're getting this idea into the classroom and into your kid's head that there are all these ways of knowing, that there's no one way to know things that is superior to other ways. And there is. Like I said at the outset, do you want your brain surgeon thinking there are multiple ways of knowing how to operate on your brain? And one includes, witch doctoring. Are we going to ever be able to say that's not an appropriate way because it's not Western medicine? If we teach kids this, at what point will we have taught this? And then we have to turn around and say, oh, all that stuff we taught you in school? Yeah, we were lying. So that's one example. Okay. So then let's look at another thing that they talk about, social emotional. Social and emotional learning is hegemonic miseducation. Students deserve humanization instead. This is the presumption that your child is not a human until the school teaches them how to be one. And that only when they're appropriately taught how to be the kind of human that the school / the government thinks they should be, will they actually be human? This is dehumanization. This is literally what the Nazis did. Literally what the Nazis did. If you were sympathetic to Jews, you were just as inhuman as Jews. So they're worming their way into your kid's mind about what it means to be a human being. How much easier is it going to be to attack people and demonize people and disrespect people and discriminate against people? So going so far as to pass laws that discriminate based on race, if you tell them that, well, they weren't properly humanized. They're not really human. This is genocidal stuff, you guys. And, it looks all nice. It's in an academic journal, Deb. They can't possibly know that this is 2021. Yeah. So back then they thought they were very civilized. Let's see. What else do we have up here? Then we have this charming thing. It seems that only as CRT moved into education did the specific term social justice become identified with the theory. So back when it was first created, it wasn't really even necessarily talked about as social justice. It was a legal theory. And then it says, William Tate joined the terms of CRT and social justice when he wrote, critical race scholars are engaged in a dynamic process seeking to explain the realities of race in an ever-changing society. Thus, their theoretical positions, and more specifically, these elements, should be viewed as a part of an interactive project of scholarship and social justice. 1997. In this moment, the connection between CRT and social justice became indelibly linked and often misinterpreted. Tate links the scholarship of CRT with the process of seeking equity and exposing injustice through academic discourse. However, as the field has evolved, social justice and CRT have come to mean enactments of praxis, that's in the classroom, rather than the scholarship itself. Now we are just taking it to the streets. We are taking it to the streets. We're actually doing it in real time. So then we have this. This is from PBS. PBS. Critical race theory itself is not being taught in K-12 schools. But look what it says. Critical race theory itself is not being taught in K-12 schools unless you're talking about some very advanced students. However, the research and scholarship that inform CRT have greatly shifted how many education experts view our school systems. And this is, in our nation's schools, we still have sizable and stubborn gaps in academic proficiency. They've decided that the critical theory explains that. So they've decided. They're done examining it. They're done questioning it. They've decided. The gaps in performance across racial categories, they say, is because the country is inherently racist. The systems all across the board are inherently racist. Somehow your child can't read because the legal system, the justice system, everything is racist outside in the world, and that's why your kid can't read. That's why they're not performing. Everything about that is because of racism, and somehow they're going to change it inside the school. And the way they say they're going to change it is by making your child aware of this. How does making a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old aware of this improving their ability to read? Can someone explain that to me? I don't see how. And nobody has adequately explained that to me. So that's something else. And then this is so important because they're going to try to convince you that they are doing this to improve your child's self-esteem, that they have to lift these kids up and make sure these kids know they're cared about in order for them to perform. And this piece, I'm going to link to this. When I'm done, I will put it, actually, I'm going to drop this into the comments, but I'll also put it afterwards for the people watching in the replay here. Okay. I hope this works. And go. All right. This is a fantastic article that everyone should read. If you're a parent or concerned about kids, what you don't know about self-esteem in our children. Now, this is actually based on research, unlike the garbage they're teaching in the school. And you should read all of it, but I want to fast forward and go to some of these sections specifically. Why self-esteem is important. Now, you might think, well, duh, of course it's important, but there's some specifics. With each passing year, our world grows increasingly complex. As more and more jobs become automated, the jobs of the future will require higher skill levels among people who are programming and running the robots. Braden observes that we are constantly called upon to think, to learn, to master new ways of functioning. Functioning, not knowing, functioning, okay? And to respond appropriately to change. High self-esteem, including the reliance on our rational faculties, will be essential for us to thrive in our modern environment. What are our kids being taught about rational faculties? What are they being taught about reason and objectivity and science? What are they being taught about ways of knowing? Okay? They're being taught that like no one way is really better than any other way. So what's going to motivate them other than, oh no, I don't know what I need to know to be effective. There's a specific way of knowing that I need to have, that I need to be able to do in order to do these jobs. If they've been taught to believe that's a lie, or it's worse, it's racist to say that to them, what's their motivation to do it? And you have to, they won't even have the self-esteem to believe they can do it. Their self-esteem will depend, and it's not even self-esteem, their self-image. The feeling that they're worthy of anything at all will literally depend on maintaining the illusion that different ways of knowing are okay in the world, that you can continue to function with whatever the heck way of knowing you have, and anybody who stops you is being racist and mean. Development of self-esteem begins in childhood, even in infancy. As children, in response to our life circumstances and the way we're raised, we develop an internal working model. This internal working model can support high self-esteem or it can limit the growth of self-esteem. If children are neglected or abused, they can develop feelings of futility and powerlessness. So now you have a kid who may have this going on at home as it is, and they come into the school. While children are supported and nurtured, they can develop a belief in their own worthiness and their ability to face the challenges of life. But the people in the classroom right now, in the anti-racism social justice classroom, insist that they are doing what is effective to raise self-esteem. They insist on it. They say that's what they're doing. We're being helpful. So let's take a look. She says, our education system can significantly influence child self-esteem. It can. There's a disturbing trend in today's education system moving away from an emphasis on independent thinking and self-responsibility, which are key components of self-esteem, in the name of anti-racism or social justice. School districts around the United States are introducing materials that are cultivating a disempowering mentality, often rooted in victimhood among many children. And let's fast forward here. These approaches negatively impact the development of self-esteem in several ways. If children are consistently told they are oppressed because of their skin color, they can easily develop a victim mentality. Promoting a victim mentality as a method of core self-identification does not help children develop a sense of self-responsibility. The practice of self-responsibility is one of 6 pillars of Braden's self-esteem model. Self-responsibility means that we accept our responsibility for the attainment of our own goals. If we're lacking in self-responsibility, we do not take ownership of our own choices and actions. We're at the mercy of forces that buffet us about. So, this is so, so important. The ability to think independently, which we're told is bad. We're told explicitly now by the social justice people and the social emotional learning and everything that is bad. The only kind of independent thinking they want is feeling. They don't want thinking. They want feeling. Tell us how you feel. What are your feelings about this situation? And when you elevate feeling above thinking and you make feelings reality, you are literally cultivating a belief system that gets in the way of coping and changing to adapt to new situations. because change is hard. Change is uncomfortable. Change is scary. So if you get stuck in, but I'm scared and it's uncomfortable and someone's to blame, how resilient are you? If you're looking around for, I don't feel safe. I feel unsafe. Who's at fault for my lack of safety? Are you going to be resourceful and resilient? Do you even know how to begin? No, you don't. That's why teaching kids to get all in touch with their feelings and have school become this place of touchy-feely, social and emotional. It's like we're all in group therapy now, is the wrong way to go. We should go the opposite way. School should almost be a haven where we're discouraged from relying on our emotions, because it's those kinds of emotions that cause bullying. You threaten me, you scare me, you offend me, I bully you back, or I fight back, or I defend myself, okay? If instead we taught reason-based thinking, like maybe that kid's having a bad day, let's leave them alone. Let's just not engage, let's go the other way, okay? If you can think your way out of these situations, you'll have less violence, violence, impulse control, all of these things are going to be exacerbated when we tell people lived experience and your feelings are so important. Let's talk some more about how to identify microaggressions. That is exactly the opposite of what we need to teach self-esteem. There's in touch with your feelings, which again, I don't know that we need to have school be the place to help kids with that. And there's relying on your feelings. And they are going in that direction, that feelings are so valid, so valid. Unless, of course, your feeling is that the prevailing wisdom being taught in the school is offensive, then your feelings don't count. Then it's okay for everybody to gang up on you and bully you. So they're perfectly okay with bullying. It's just got to be in one direction. Anybody who challenges the prevailing wisdom. Our highly developed minds are an essential part of what makes us human and are a primary tool for developing self-esteem. If we de-emphasize our ability to think, we're reducing our humanity. It is very hard, you guys, for me to not look at schools with a jaded eye and believe that it's intentional. It is so hard. I know there are people sitting there telling me, oh, but never attribute to malice that which could be explained by, incompetence or stupidity or whatever. Okay, I'm trying. I'm really, really trying. And I can believe it down at the teacher level. I think they've been as brainwashed as anybody, but I have a really hard time believing that it's not intentional up here at the policy level. They have the data. They have all of this research. This is not a mystery to them. They're actively choosing to not look at this. Just like the science of reading, we have known for decades and decades how to fix this problem that we created with literacy. Why aren't we doing it? Why aren't people asking that? Why isn't every school board meeting dominated by, why aren't you using the science of reading? Why aren't you using the science of reading? If in fact they're not. And that's easy to find out. Just ask them. If they're still doing whole word, they're not doing it. If they're still doing look say, they're not doing it. The anti-racist and social justice curricula being used by schools can impart a feeling of shame for immutable characteristics such as being white. But it's not just being white. It's also being black. Imagine you're told, like, too bad, so sad, kiddo, they're in your way. That kid on the other side of the room, he's got these advantages and the system is set up for his benefit and not yours. And it's going to be a never-ending struggle. And how about you're a parent and you're called into a stakeholder meeting and you notice that all the other parents there are also black or brown and there are no white parents there. And they tell you, like, we called you here because you have needs and we want to meet your needs. What are the needs that you have? Now, some people might be like, give me stuff. Okay. And you would find that that's not racial. That's anybody that you call in and offer them things, they'll take it. But there might be some very proud people that are going, seriously? I bring my kid to you to teach them. And you call me in like, I'm your baby, I'm your child, I'm your pet. Just teach my kid to read. Teach my kid to do math. Like, why are we having this conversation? What is the problem? You've had X amount of years. My kid still can't read. I don't need anything. My kid has needs. Get on with your job. So, they may not even show up because they're so disgusted, but they have no chance to send their kid anywhere else because they don't have school choice. So we make a lot of assumptions about the parents. We make a lot of assumptions about, the kids, but we're not asking all the kids or all the parents. We're asking the subsets who show up to be told, here, do you need things? Here, we'll give you things. In the same meeting, they're like, we found that some of the people didn't have laundry, so we gave them a laundromat at the school. We found out they didn't have food, so we gave them food. We found out they didn't have mobile phones, we gave them mobile phones. We found out they didn't have internet, we gave them internet. I'm like, are they magically learning? Did it fix it? You gave them stuff. You gave them stuff. If that made learning possible, every kid in America would be a freaking academic genius because we spend more per capita than any other industrial country by a wide margin. If it were about money, the problem would have been solved 10 times over. We're driving a clunker that we have replaced parts on for generations, and we have already paid for a fleet of Rolls Royces. I said a Rolls Royce the other night. It's a fleet of Rolls Royces. And we're still driving the little clunker and clunk, 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 clunk. Oh, broke down. Clunk, clunk, clunk. So, and promoting a mentality of victimhood does not build a moral foundation. To tell a young criminal, for example, that when he robs a grocery store and brutalizes the owner is not really the guilty party. The guilt belongs to the system. And that is literally what we are doing. So please read this article, share it around to other people. Everything you need to know really about why the current trends in education are bad is in this one article. You don't even need to mention critical race theory. You just need to know that they are doing the exact opposite of this. There is not personal accountability. They are not going back and saying there needs to be more from the students. We need to go back to expelling people. We need to go back to doing things where we hold their feet to the fire for achievement. And if there are kids who are not achieving, we need to figure out how to deal with them off to the side and not hold back the kids who are doing what they need to do. And we're doing the exact opposite. We're holding anybody who's trying down. Now imagine, if you will, the working class Black family that is just working their butt off to get their kid a good education. The kids in school, kids nose in a book every night, trying to do better. And they're actually achieving it like the 85th, 90th percentile. They go into school, whatever, but the rest of the kids in their class are not. And so they decide, we're going to do away with grades and we're going to do away with these tests. And we're going to do away with that advanced high school that you were sort of hanging your hat on hoping to go to because that was going to get you into college. Yeah, we're going to do away with that because there are only 2 of you and they're like 50 of the kids who are not with their nose in a book every night. It'll be okay. How do you think that kid feels? How do you think their parents feel? Like, I'm doing everything right, but I don't count. What counts are the people over here who are not doing it. And we got to find a balance. Right now, we've tilted it so much to assume all benign, everything is they're just such victims and, oh, it's so sad. No personal responsibility over here. And the kids over here are like, yeah, you're fine. You didn't do anything special. It's magic. I don't know. We don't even look at you. In fact, we don't even want to acknowledge your existence because if we acknowledge your existence, then we have to admit that it's not about race. That's why we don't look at the Asian scores. That's why we don't look at the high flyers in the Black community. That's why we don't even talk about the culture that says, don't act white in school. That's a thing. That's still a real thing. And then imagine teaching a bunch of kids, well, whiteness is bad. In a culture that already is saying, don't read, don't study, don't get good grades because that's acting white. Well, you've just given them permission to not do it. Why would I do that? That's acting white. That's the white man's tools. That's the master's tools in the master's house and reason and logic and science and all that's bad. I want my different ways of knowing. I want to tell different stories. I want to just show up and be given my diploma, even though I can't read. And then somehow magically everything's going to be okay. We're selling these kids a bill of goods. It's a lie. And it's racist. It's absolutely racist because it's going to hurt the people they claim to want to help the most. So that is where I land on this. And now I guess I'm out of breath and out of things to say. I will ask if you have any final comments or questions or anything left that you'd like me to touch on. Otherwise, I'm going to go rest. I'm trying so hard to educate, but I don't know if it's well received. We have guys like what's his name who chime in and say that I'm a racist person, and I don't feel like I am. I'm not, as a matter of fact. That's the thing that gets me. Like, I listen to a guy like Charles Murray, and I hear what he says, and I don't hear that as racism. I hear that as just, here are some facts I found. Now let's go look at the other things that are impacting these students. Here's one factor that we can consider. Let's look at the environment now. And we have to take into account all this stuff. Because we keep acting like IQ is determinative. You have a high IQ, you're going to be a success. We know that's not true. We know for a fact that's not true. It's one measure. It doesn't make a person better or more successful at all. And there are so many other skills. There are so many other talents. And I just don't know why you would look away from social science that was done with rigor, that has actual data, and say, we don't want to even know that. We're not looking. I encourage everybody to get his latest book. I ordered it. I'm thinking of, doing a read along. But I think it's really important for us to read some actual social science, because the people pushing critical social justice in our schools claim to be social scientists. Does it feel like science to you to just conclude that everything bad in the country is because of one cause? Does that theory of action even hold water? Oh, one last thing before I go. As I said in the beginning, and some of you might have missed it, there are some very basic steps you can take. And I'm going to keep repeating them. I'm going to repeat them again on other videos, but I don't know who's going to tune in when. So here it is. Go to your state's Department of Education. Use the search box to search equity. See what you find. Go to your state's teacher association. Every state has one. Search equity. See what you find. Go to your state's school board association. Search equity. See what you find. Click into those links, okay? Understand that in 2015, Barack Obama he had an initiative where he appropriated billions of dollars to address equity in schools, but every school district in the country had to submit an equity plan in 2015. The theory of action behind this was that disparities in suspensions and disparities in outcomes were the result of Black and brown children having inexperienced teachers and teachers who didn't look like them enough. Okay. So the goal of it was to submit the plan for how you would take the money that they appropriated and apply it to recruiting, training, and retaining teachers that looked more like the student body, because that was the theory of action, that they'll do better when the teacher looks like them, and retraining existing teachers to be more focused on equity. So even if a teacher had been there a long time, they'd be retrained to understand their racism and all this other stuff, and to make sure they shifted things around so the teachers with more experience were more evenly distributed across districts and so forth, across school buildings, because the presumption was if you've been in the district a longer time, you're a better teacher, which is kind of a leap. It may or may not be true. You might have a newer teacher who's a rock star. You may have an older teacher who's tired and bored and doesn't give a damn. And it's a presumption. Nobody challenged these premises. The money was appropriated. The equity plans were done. As to my knowledge, every district did one. And many of them collected on this money and started retraining their teachers in 2015. And before that, there were initiatives when he first came into office too. And before that, there was No Child Left Behind with George Bush. These things have been going on ever since Carter created the Department of Education. It has given the federal government the power to ask Congress for money for the purpose of bribing little carrots to the states. Do this that goes along with our political agenda. Conveniently, we'll call it education. We'll call it, benefit to the world, right? But do these things and you get money. Well, who's going to not want the money? It's they're evaluated on how much money they bring to the district. So that's what they do. And understand that your school board members are politicians. Your superintendent is a politician. And to a large degree, your teachers are activists. So if you can just understand this structure and how this all works, and that those teachers associations give to the Democratic Party 99% of the time. Those school board associations, check out their legislative agenda. They give to the Democratic Party 99% of the time. Okay? And those are your tax dollars funding all of that. Are you starting to catch on? So what exactly are you taking back? Your kids and your tax dollars, not the schools. Leave them empty. That's my advice. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow when I'm on with Chris Paisley, and we're going to be talking about white identity and the problems associated with that, the trouble with it. Okay? Have a great day. Thanks for watching. I can't click the button. And really? You're not going to click the button? My system won't